A wounded woman escaped bandits into the arms of a cowboy who secretly built an empire. Whoa there, darling. You're bleeding through the sand. Who did this to you? June froze. Her arm instinctively reached behind her, fingers brushing the handle of the small knife tucked into the waistband of her jeans. Her breaths came in short, frantic bursts. The voice was deep, steady, startled but not aggressive. The man who stepped closer was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dust-covered cowboy hat and a long canvas coat. His boots crunched softly on the desert gravel. "I ain't here to hurt you," he added, raising both hands slowly. "But you need help. That cut's too deep for a bandana and a prayer." June's gaze darted to his eyes, expecting calculation or something darker, but all she saw was concern. Her body trembled with adrenaline, blood loss, and fear. She was barefoot, torn jeans soaked at the thigh with a deep crimson stain, the right side of her shirt ripped and hanging open. "I don't need help," she muttered, backing away. "You're limping," he replied. "Pretty sure your legs disagree." The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows over the arid hills. The desert wind picked up, stinging her eyes and swirling dust through the dying light. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, her knees threatening to give. He took one slow step forward. "Let me help you stand, just to get you out of the wind." June's voice cracked. "No cops, you call anyone, and I'm gone." "No one's coming. I don't like sirens either." She watched him, chest heaving, weighing the last ounce of trust she had left in the world. Then everything around her tilted. The next thing she knew, strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. When June opened her eyes again, it was to the glow of a lantern and the scent of wood smoke and leather. The pain in her leg throbbed sharply now, and she instinctively tried to sit up. "Easy there," came the cowboy's voice again, now softer. "You're safe. Just stitched you up far as I could." She looked around. They were inside a small wooden cabin with stone walls and a slanted roof. There were no pictures, no electronics, only basic furniture, a wood-burning stove, and the faint sound of a fire crackling outside. Her leg was propped up on a stool, wrapped in clean gauze. She could see the stain of her blood soaking through. "You live out here?" she rasped. "I do." "You some kind of survivalist?" He half smiled. "I just like peace and quiet." She squinted at him, trying to read him again. "Name?" "Caleb." "Why help me, Caleb?" He looked at her for a long beat. "Because someone didn't." June swallowed hard, her throat dry. "You got water?" He brought over a tin cup. She drank greedily, wincing when the movement tugged at the wound. When she finished, she asked, "Where are we?" "Dust Valley, middle of nowhere by most maps." "Perfect." Caleb crouched by the fireplace, feeding it another log. "You want to tell me what happened?" "No." "Fair enough." Silence stretched. June looked down at her bandaged leg, then toward the door. "I'll be gone by morning." "You won't make it 3 miles on that leg." "I'll crawl if I have to." He didn't argue. Instead, he stood and moved to a wooden shelf, pulling down a clean shirt and setting it beside her. "You can stay as long as you need, as long as you don't bring trouble here." "I already did," she said, eyes hard. "They're coming." His jaw tightened. "Who?" "Guys with guns, bad ones. They were supposed to take me somewhere. I ran." Caleb nodded slowly. "Cartel?" "Worse. Private, paid. They don't leave witnesses." She shifted uncomfortably, pain flashing across her face. "Then we'll make sure they don't find you," Caleb said quietly. "You don't know what you're getting into. I've dealt with worse than men with guns." That night, June barely slept. Her body ached, her mind spun with fear. But some part of her, buried deep under trauma and distrust, clung to the quiet rhythm of the fire and the calm presence of the stranger who hadn't turned her in or asked too many questions. She dozed off to the distant howl of coyotes. At sunrise, Caleb was already outside, tending to the horses. He moved with the ease of someone who knew every inch of the land beneath his boots. June limped to the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame. "You ever use a rifle?" he asked, without turning. She hesitated. "A little." He handed her one. "Just in case." June took it, fingers instinctively checking the safety. Her eyes scanned the horizon. Then she saw it. Tire tracks. Deep ones. At least 2 vehicles had pulled off the main dirt road less than 100 yards from the cabin, then looped back toward the eastern ridge. Her stomach dropped. "They're close," she whispered. Caleb followed her gaze. His jaw clenched. "They're tracking you." June's throat tightened. "I thought I threw them off back at the canyon." "You left blood behind," he said grimly. "That's enough for dogs, or determined men." He looked back at her, eyes sharper now. "They'll be here by tonight." She gripped the rifle tighter. "Then we better be ready." Caleb nodded once. "We will be." And as the rising sun set the horizon ablaze, both knew the quiet was over. June woke to the soft scent of cedar smoke and something simmering over fire, beans maybe, or some thick stew she had not tasted in years. The ache in her leg was still there, dull and pulsing, but wrapped cleanly now, tight but not suffocating. She sat up slowly, wincing, and found herself once again in the small wooden cabin. Caleb was sitting just outside the door, sharpening a knife on a stone with slow, methodical movements. His back was broad beneath his worn flannel shirt, his hat resting on the rail beside him. The morning air was crisp, clear, and quiet, except for the occasional chirp of a bird or creak of the windmill turning behind the cabin. He didn't turn when she stepped into the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame. "You always this quiet?" she asked. Caleb glanced over his shoulder. "Only when someone's healing." "I'm not healing. I'm hiding." Same thing some days. June limped toward a wooden stool and sank onto it. He handed her a mug of something warm, coffee, strong and bitter, but it cut through the fog in her head like a knife. She drank, grateful. He didn't press her. Didn't ask why she ran, who was after her, or why her eyes looked older than her face. And that unsettled her more than any question would have. "You don't want to know what I did?" she asked finally, staring into her cup. "If you want to tell me, you will. What if I'm dangerous?" Caleb looked at her then, his eyes calm but not soft. "Then you wouldn't be scared." June let out a breath, part relief, part something heavier she didn't want to name. She sipped the coffee again and looked out across the land. It was wide open, untamed, nothing but sand, brush, and the slow crawl of light over distant hills. The kind of place no one could own, but some might try. "What is this place?" she asked. "Mine." "You own all this?" He nodded once. She blinked. "What do you do with it?" Caleb gave a half smile. "I watch it, let it breathe. You don't sell it? Nope. No cattle? Just horses. And quiet." June studied him. His hands were calloused, his clothes plain, but nothing about him screamed ordinary. He moved like a man who'd built things, lost things, fought for something bigger than himself. "So, what do you actually do?" she asked. Caleb took a long pause, then said simply, "I look after the land." "That's enough." She narrowed her eyes. "You mean you look after it like a rancher or like a—" She stopped herself. He didn't answer, just took her empty mug, refilled it, and handed it back. By afternoon, June's curiosity had grown roots. She tried not to care, but Caleb's silence made it harder. It wasn't the kind of silence that hid things. It was the kind that made you want to speak into it. She sat by the fence as he worked the corral, guiding 2 horses with subtle, practiced movements. His patience with them, his steadiness, it felt rare, almost sacred. She remembered hands that once held her too tightly, smiles that turned into cages. A man she had trusted who sold her information to criminals for a quick payout, left her to be handled by men with sharp smiles and sharper knives. Now she watched Caleb and felt something strange. Safety. "You ever gonna ask me what happened?" she called out. He stopped brushing the mare and looked up. "Only if you want me to know." June hesitated. "Sold me. My ex said I was a liability. Gave them everything. Where I lived, where I'd be. I was supposed to disappear." Caleb didn't react the way others had. No wide eyes, no anger, no pity. Just a slow, deep breath. "Sounds like someone else made a choice they don't deserve to live with," he said. June looked down, feeling heat rush to her throat. "It's stupid. I should have seen it coming." "Trusting someone ain't stupid," he replied. "It's brave. The betrayal's on them." She blinked fast. It had been a long time since anyone said that, maybe ever. He walked over and leaned on the fence beside her. "You planning on staying gone forever?" "I don't know. I don't know where gone ends. You'll know when it starts feeling like breathing again." June let that settle. She watched him for a moment. "Why live out here, alone?" He looked toward the hills. "Because when you've seen what money and ambition do to people, a little silence and sky is the only cure." "You were rich, weren't you?" Caleb didn't answer. "You're still rich." He smiled, just barely. "I'm exactly where I need to be." That night, June lay awake under a thick wool blanket, staring at the wooden ceiling beams. Caleb was in the next room, hammering something softly by lantern light, and for the first time in a long while, her heart didn't race with fear. Only questions, and maybe a little hope. The fire came without warning. June awoke to the sting of smoke in her throat and the flickering glow of flames lighting the cabin walls. Outside, she heard boots crunching gravel, glass shattering, and a voice shouting, "Where is she?" Caleb. She reached for the rifle. Gone. Caleb was gone, too. As the front door slammed open, June dove through the back window and hit the ground hard. Pain shot through her healing leg, but she crawled into the brush, every breath ragged. Voices echoed through the trees. She couldn't have gotten far. "Carter's got the girl, find her!" She squeezed into a rocky hollow, blood seeping through her bandage. Her heart pounded. They knew Caleb's name. Then, another cry, "Caleb!" She couldn't stay hidden, not while he was out there. She grabbed her knife and crawled back toward the flames. Smoke curled through the trees. Through it, she saw Caleb on his knees. His face was bruised, bloodied. One man loomed over him, another aimed a shotgun. "Should have stayed buried, Carter," the gunman said. "Your little land project ends tonight. You think this is about land?" June crept closer. The gunman raised his weapon. "Hey!" she shouted. All three turned. She lunged, driving her blade into the gunman's side. He cried out, dropped the weapon. Caleb surged up, punching the second man square in the jaw. The third rushed June, but Caleb tackled him. They rolled in the dirt, fists flying. June grabbed the shotgun and fired. The attacker reeled back, wounded. The rest fled into the tree. June dropped the gun and ran to Caleb. He leaned against a log, gasping, blood staining his shirt. "You're hit," she said, pressing her hands to his side. "Just a graze," he muttered. "They'll come back." "North Ridge," he said. "Family land, safe." She threw his arm over her shoulder. "You saved me. Now I save you." They moved through the woods, the fire behind them glowing orange in the dark. Caleb staggered, groaning, but never let go of her. Before dawn, they reached an old ranch house, weathered and forgotten. June helped him inside, eased him onto a cot. Both were bloodied, exhausted, trembling. But they were alive, and in the ashes of the night something between them had changed. Something real. The abandoned ranch house was quiet the next morning, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of wood shifting with the wind. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the weathered walls, casting long beams across the dusty floor. June moved carefully, her legs still sore, but the fire inside her had reignited. Caleb was asleep in the other room, pale from blood loss but still breathing steady. She had done what she could to bandage him. Now, curiosity tugged at her harder than exhaustion. She explored the house, slow, cautious steps over old boards and scattered tools. It was the kind of place that had once held life, family. Now it stood as a skeleton of memory. But it was not entirely empty. In a room at the back, June found a rusted metal cabinet with its doors left half open. Inside were rolls of old land maps, yellowed papers, and folders worn with time. She reached for the top file, brushing off the dust. Carter Land Group. She blinked. The name rang loud in her mind. She flipped the folder open. Property deeds, transaction records, some dated as far back as a decade. Dozens of names, parcels bought, sold, sometimes returned. A red stamp marked many of the later files, reclaimed. June pulled more folders free, scanning signatures. Caleb's name appeared again and again. In some, he signed as CEO, others as buyer, but never seller. There were letters, too, correspondence with banks, non-profits, legal entities, and photos. In one image, Caleb stood beside a smiling couple in front of a red barn. Another showed him shaking hands with a group of farmers, younger, cleaner shaven, but unmistakably him. She sat back on the floor, stunned. Caleb wasn't just watching land. He had once built an empire. When he woke, Caleb found her in the front room, the folders spread around her like puzzle pieces waiting to be solved. He moved to stand but winced, clutching his side. "You went through it," he said quietly. "You didn't hide it," she replied. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "Guess I didn't." June stood, holding one of the photos. "You built Carter Land Group?" "I did." "And then you disappeared?" He nodded. "When it got ugly," she stepped closer. "These records, you bought land for people, gave it back after it was taken." "I tried to," he said, "but I was too late for some." June's voice softened. "What happened?" Caleb exhaled, then lowered himself into a chair, as if the weight of the truth had finally grown too heavy to carry. "It started simple," he began. "My idea was to help small farmers, buy land cheap, lease it back with fair terms, keep them from losing it to banks or corporations. I found partners, investors, people who said all the right things." He paused, jaw tightening. "Then I learned they were using our company, my company, to force people off the land, buying debt, seizing property, flipping it to developers. I was the face of it. The press called it innovation. I called it theft." June sat across from him, silent. "I tried to stop it," he continued. "Pulled my name from the board, gave back everything I could, but by then the damage was done. People blamed me, and they weren't wrong. I let it happen." She reached for his hand. "But you didn't walk away." "No," he said, voice low. "I sold everything I owned, went quiet, and I started buying back what they stole, piece by piece, quietly. No press, no name. Why not let people know it was you? Because they'd see me as the man who took it in the first place. Say I didn't want thanks. I just wanted to fix it." Her throat tightened. "You've been fixing other people's pain while living with your own." Caleb looked down. "That's the only way I could live with myself." June stood, walked to the window. Outside, the burned edge of the night's chaos still lingered, ashes scattered over the brush, a charred tree stump smoldering faintly. She turned back to him. "You saved me without knowing who I was, without asking. You didn't even flinch." He met her eyes. "I knew what it was like to run." Her chest ached. She crossed the room and knelt beside his chair. "I see you now, Caleb Carter. And you're not the man they say you were. You're the one who stayed even when no one else did." He reached out, touched her face with a rough, blood-stained hand. "And you're the only one who ever looked past the silence." In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the land, not the past, only the fragile, powerful truth they now shared. June hadn't spoken in hours. The sun was beginning to set again over the dusty plains of Dust Valley, casting long golden shadows across the hills. As she finished packing the small satchel she'd found in the old ranch house, Caleb sat on the porch steps, bandaged and bruised, watching her with quiet resignation. He didn't ask her to stay. She didn't explain why she had to go. The silence between them had turned cold. "You lied," she said finally, her voice brittle. Caleb looked down at the dirt beneath his boots. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you." "That's the same thing," she snapped. "You let me think you were some quiet cowboy hiding from the world, but you're not hiding. You're fixing what you helped break." He didn't defend himself. That made it worse. "I trusted you," she said. "You gave me space, let me breathe again, and all the while you had this empire behind you. Do you know how that feels? Like I was small, like you pitied me." "I never pitied you, June," he said quietly. "I saw you." She turned away before her tears could betray her. "I can't do this. I can't stay here and pretend like it doesn't change everything." And with that, she left. The town of Red Hollow was just over a day's walk if you knew the old trails, and June did. She reached it late the next afternoon, covered in dust, aching from head to toe, and unsure of what she was even looking for. Maybe clarity, maybe just space to breathe again. But the moment she stepped into the corner store near the post office, the world shifted. Two women stood near the back, speaking in hushed voices that stopped June in her tracks. "They burned the Dawsons' barn last night," one said. "Left a mark on the door. Same one from the ranch fire up near the ridge." "The Dawsons? But they'd just moved back in. Got the deed last spring." "From that Carter group, right? Word is the same people after that land years ago are back, and meaner." June's heart dropped. Another customer added, "Sheriff said it's organized. Real tactical. They're targeting folks who reclaimed their land from the Carter buyback fund." June stepped outside, her blood running cold. It wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. She sat on the bench beside the store, staring out at the quiet street. Children played near a water trough. Horses clopped past. But under the surface, something ugly had returned. The same men who had hunted her were now hunting others, people who had nothing but a home they fought to keep. Caleb knew this. Of course he did. And she had walked away. Her chest ached with something heavier than guilt. Regret. Not because he hadn't told her everything, but because, deep down, she had known who he was. Not a cowboy, not a tycoon, not even a hero. He was the kind of man who stayed behind when it hurt, the kind who fought without fanfare, who gave back land not for praise but because he could not stand to see others lose what he had lost. She had run from that man, and she had to go back. By dawn, June was on horseback, pushing hard across the hills, ignoring the throb in her leg. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and her heart hammered with urgency. She didn't know what she would say when she saw him. Maybe she wouldn't say anything at all. Maybe she would just stand there until he understood. The ridge came into view just as the sky turned pink. The old ranch house sat in silence, the front door half open, the chimney cold. "Caleb," she called, dismounting. No answer. She stepped inside, pulse racing. The table was still scattered with papers and maps, the cot unmade. His coat hung over the chair. His hat sat on the banister. Then she saw it, a note pinned to the wall. "Gone to check the Dawson place. They need someone to stand with them." Her breath caught. He had gone, wounded, alone, and still fighting, not because it was safe, but because someone had to. She spun on her heel, climbed back onto the horse, and kicked hard. This time, she would not let him stand alone. The Dawson Ranch sat at the edge of the canyon, surrounded by dry fields, rusted fences, and defiance. Caleb stood in the barn with half a dozen farmers, men and women who had once lost their land and now stood shoulder to shoulder with the man who had helped them reclaim it. June arrived just before sunset, her horse lathered and trembling, her eyes burning with urgency. "You're late," Caleb said, his voice gravel soft but laced with warmth. "I came back," she said, breathless, "and I'm not leaving again." They had only hours to prepare. Word had spread fast. The same crew who burned the barn 2 nights ago would be back before morning, led by none other than Logan Price, June's former lover, the man who had betrayed her and sold her to the highest bidder. Now he wanted land, revenge, control. June helped hand out ammunition and marked escape routes behind the barn. Caleb coordinated positions along the ridge, using his deep knowledge of the land to their advantage. "They'll come from the west side," Caleb muttered, pointing to the narrow canyon pass. "That's where the dirt gives under the weight of trucks. If we catch them there, we can bottleneck them." "And if we don't?" June asked. "We make them bleed for every inch." Night fell. The wind howled low between the rocks. Then, just before midnight, headlights appeared, cutting through the dust and sagebrush like glowing fangs. The invaders came in black trucks, armed and armored, riding with the arrogance of men who'd never been told no. Logan stepped out first, tall and smirking, a pistol resting at his hip. He shouted across the clearing, his voice echoing like a curse. "Come on out, Carter. Let's talk like businessmen." Caleb emerged, calm, rifle at his side. "This isn't business, Logan. This is theft." Logan grinned. "Call it what you want, but you've got land I want and people too dumb to see who you really are. You gonna hide behind these sheep forever?" June stepped out beside Caleb, eyes blazing. "No one's hiding," she said, "and you're not getting a damn thing." Logan's face twisted when he saw her. "Well, well, I thought you were gone for good." "I was," she said, "until I remembered who I am." Logan's smirk dropped. Then came the first shot. It cracked through the night, ripping into the barn door inches from where Caleb stood. Chaos erupted. Gunfire rained across the clearing. The farmers took cover behind hay bales and wooden carts, firing back with whatever they had: old hunting rifles, shotguns, even a crossbow. June ducked behind a trough, breathing hard, heart hammering. Caleb was 20 feet ahead, taking cover behind a wagon, returning fire with sharp, practiced aim. One of the attackers tried to flank the left side, sneaking along the ridge. June saw him first. She rose from cover, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped. Her hands shook, but she didn't hesitate again. Through the smoke and shouts, she found herself moving instinctively, reloading, calling warnings, helping an older farmer move his wounded son behind the barn. She was no longer a victim running from shadows. She was the one shining light through them. Suddenly, she heard Caleb shout her name. She turned. Logan was aiming straight at her from the rocks above. Then came a blur, Caleb diving across the open ground. The gunshot rang out. Caleb's body jerked mid-air and collapsed onto the earth. Jones screamed, running to him. His shirt was dark with blood at the shoulder and chest. "No, no, no," she cried, pressing her hands to the wound. "Stay with me." He coughed, eyes fluttering. "You okay?" he whispered. "You idiot," she sobbed. "Why would you?" "Because I couldn't lose you again." Behind them, the gunfire slowed. Logan's crew was retreating, disoriented by the resistance, the terrain, and their own wounded. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had finally called in the law. But June didn't care. All she saw was the blood on Caleb's chest, spreading like a wound in the land itself. The same land he'd fought to protect, and now bled into Caleb's. World drifted in and out of haze for days. Pain blurred everything: the sterile white of bandages, the sting of antiseptic, the murmur of distant voices. But through it all, one thing remained constant. June's hand in his. She never left. When he woke for the first time, really woke, not groaning or half muttering through fever, the sun was pouring in through the window of the small-town clinic. Birds sang somewhere beyond the sill. A fan hummed low on the wall, and June was asleep, slouched in a wooden chair beside him, her hand still wrapped around his. He turned his head slowly, pain licking through his chest where the bullet had passed dangerously close to his lung. But he didn't care. She was there. He didn't need to ask why. She opened her eyes minutes later, almost as if sensing the shift in the room. "You're awake," she said, her voice cracking with quiet relief. He tried to smile. "You look worse than me." She laughed, wiping at her eyes. "You almost died, Cowboy." "Don't try to be funny." "Almost," he whispered, "but you pulled me back." She leaned in, forehead resting gently against his. "You don't get to leave yet," she murmured. "Not when we've just started." In the days that followed, June barely left his side. She read aloud to him, old westerns ironically, and brought him soup he always claimed was too salty. They watched the sunrise together from his window, and at night she told him stories from before everything fell apart. Her childhood dreams, the books she wanted to write, the cabin she once sketched on a napkin and called home, and he listened. Because that's what he had always longed for. Someone who saw beyond land, beyond empire. Someone who saw him. One evening, a nurse entered quietly and handed June a small envelope with Caleb's name scribbled on the front. "We found this in his coat pocket," she said. June opened it later, sitting beside his bed while he slept. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a ring, simple, silver, worn smooth with time. The note was short. "If I don't make it back, give this to her. Tell her it belonged to my mother. Tell her I wanted her to have it, no matter what." June didn't cry then, but her fingers curled tightly around the ring, and she held it to her chest like it was more precious than gold. When Caleb woke, she was waiting. "You weren't supposed to read that yet," he said softly, voice rough with sleep. "You weren't supposed to get shot." He tried to sit up straighter but winced. She helped him adjust the pillows. "I didn't mean to rush anything," he said. "That note, it wasn't pressure." "I know," she said. It was truth. He looked at her, really looked, and saw no doubt, no fear, only love. "I used to think I was building something big enough to matter," he said. "I thought if I made enough noise, bought enough land, helped enough people, it would fix the things I couldn't fix in myself." She stayed silent, letting him speak. "But I was wrong. You don't fix yourself by reaching higher. You do it by reaching inward. And you taught me that, June." He reached for the ring now resting in her palm. "I don't want to build a kingdom anymore," he whispered. "I just want to build a home with you." June's breath caught. He held up the ring, trembling slightly. "So, will you let me? Be the reason I stay? Be my beginning, not just my rescue?" Her eyes filled instantly. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Caleb, I will." Tears slipped down her cheeks as he slid the ring onto her finger, small, imperfect, and beautiful. They didn't kiss right away. They didn't need to. Because in that moment, surrounded by quiet, by the smell of clean sheets and healing wounds, two souls who had wandered long and far finally found what they were never sure existed, a place to rest, together. 1 year later, the wind in Dust Valley blew softer. The summer sun draped the hills in gold as wildflowers danced along the fence lines of a modest ranch tucked between two ridges. It wasn't large, it wasn't polished, but it was full of life. Chickens clucked near the barn, horses grazed lazily in the paddock, and laughter rang through the open air as children ran through tall grass, followed by a brown dog with a crooked tail and endless energy. Inside the cabin, the scent of cinnamon and warm oats filled the kitchen. June stood by the open window, her infant daughter nestled in one arm, the other hand stirring a pot on the stove. Her face glowed with the soft fatigue of new motherhood and the quiet joy of belonging. Outside, Caleb adjusted a saddle on one of the horses, pausing to smile at the sound of baby coos and June's gentle humming. He had more lines around his eyes now, but they came from laughter, not worry. And when he looked at his daughter, wrapped in a blanket made from an old flannel shirt, his heart swelled with a peace he never thought he'd earn. They called her Lena, a name June had always loved, soft and strong. The ranch had become more than home. It had become sanctuary. Twice a week they opened their gates to children from neighboring counties, kids who had known loss, fear, and abandonment. June led sessions beneath the big oak tree, using horses as therapy, teaching trust, one ride at a time. Caleb taught them how to lead a horse with their voice, not their hands. The laughter that now filled the land used to be silence. Caleb never reclaimed his public title. No press release, no comeback tour, but quietly, through local lawyers and anonymous donations, he helped dozens of families reclaim land that had once been stolen, helped them build greenhouses, repair wells, restock barns. No one knew his name, but they knew the man with the steady hands and the kind eyes, who always showed up with a tool belt, a seed bag, or a silent nod of understanding. One evening, as the sky melted into hues of lavender and burnt orange, Caleb lifted Lena into his arms and carried her toward the pasture where June waited with 3 horses saddled and ready. "Family ride?" she asked, smiling. He nodded, placing Lena gently into the baby wrap across June's chest. Thought it was time she saw the view from the ridge. They mounted up, slow and steady. Caleb led the way, June close behind, the baby nestled against her heartbeat. The climb to the top of the hill was quiet except for bird song and the rhythmic beat of hooves. When they reached the crest, the valley stretched before them, wide, endless, and glowing. Caleb breathed it in. "This used to be where I ran," he said, voice low. "Now it's where I stay." June leaned forward, resting a hand on his arm. "You built more than a home here," she whispered. "You built healing." As the sun dipped low, casting the world in honeyed light, Caleb looked toward the entrance of the property. A wooden sign, faded by years of weather but freshly nailed into place, swung gently in the breeze. Carved into it, worn but still proud, were the words, "The Carter Ranch, where hope comes home. Caleb smiled, and for the first time, the man who once carried the weight of empires and regret knew exactly who he was: a father, a husband, a man at peace. And as the horse beneath him stepped forward, carrying him beside the woman and child who had saved his soul, Caleb Carter rode not into the sunset, but straight into everything he had ever longed for: home. And so, from ashes and silence, two wounded souls found not just refuge, but renewal. From the dust of betrayal rose the roots of trust. From the wreckage of the past came the foundation of a new future, built not with walls and titles, but with love, resilience, and the promise of never walking alone again. Caleb and June's story reminds us, sometimes the greatest empires aren't made of land or money. They're made of quiet courage, second chances, and the family we choose. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even in the wildest storms, healing is possible, then please consider subscribing to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here, we share true, powerful, and heartfelt stories that touch your soul and remind you that hope is never too far away. Tap subscribe, ring the notification bell, and join our growing community of story lovers who believe in light after darkness. Until next time, hold on to kindness, believe in beginnings, and never stop choosing love. Soul-Stirring Stories.